take, but sometimes in no limit hold'em, it can be important to be the first one bluffing. In this scenario, me and Phil were both in the pot. None of us had anything but king high at the river. So basically, whoever bluffed first was probably going to win that pot. Of course, if he had read the situation perfectly, which was super hard, then he could have raised me and won. He could have raised me and won the pot. But if he had been first, he would have bluffed at the pot, and I would have said, "Okay, I'm going to give this one up." So there's times in no limit hold'em where it's actually nice to be first to act because you get the first crack at winning the pot. A little bit about limping in and what that does for you in different situations. A lot of the limping in, again, it depends on the structure, on the limit you're playing. If you have a lot of money in front of you compared to the limit, if you have medium stack in front of you, or if you have a low stack in front of you. If you have a low stack in front of you, limping is not that viable an option. Let's say again the blinds are 25, 50, and you have $500 in front of you. A lot of times you're just interested in increasing your stack. You don't have that big a stack. You're not risking that much. You're just trying to win a little here, a little there. The strategy changes a lot if you have a lot of chips in front of you. As I mentioned earlier, if you have 10,000 in front of you and it's only $50 for you to play the hand, limping is a very good strategy. Maybe you're trying to limp, and now suddenly small pairs becomes a very interesting hand to play. You play small pairs, you're hoping to flop a set, and maybe you're hoping to make a big score when you flop the big hand, trying to trap people. So limping in, it depends a lot on the situation you're in, how much money you have, what kind of limit you play. Stealing the blinds is really an option when it significantly increases your stack. If there's already $1,000 in the pot and you have 10,000 in front of you, you really want to increase your stack with that $1,000. It could be your local home game where you're playing $2 and $5 and you have $25 in front of you. You really want to grab that $7 already sitting out there. So again, it matters how much money you have in front of you and how much money is in the pot. Again, if you're playing your home game and you have $300 in front of you, picking up that $7 is not that big a factor in your strategy. But if you only have $20, that $7 look very appetizing. So again, keep in mind the money you have in front of you, the money that's already in the pot, the limit you're playing is very important when you want to decide whether it's a good option to try and steal the blinds. And based on that, when you have very little money in front of you, let's say you have your $20 in front of you and there's $7 already in the pot, you want to be very aggressive in stealing the blinds because that $7 means a lot to you. If you have $10,000 in front of you and there's only $50 in the pot, that $50 doesn't mean a lot, and you should be very specific and only trying to steal the blinds with really good starting hands, because sometimes you might get caught stealing and it's going to cost you a portion of your chips and you don't really want to risk it for a very little gain. So again, it depends what structure you're playing, how much money you have. Want to base that whether you want to limp as a viable option or you're actually trying to steal the blinds. Thing about either trying to limp in to make a big score or trying to steal the antes, stealing the blinds. As I mentioned, it matters a lot how much money you have. And also again, if you don't have a lot of money in front of you, you have $500 in front of you, there's $100 in the pot, you want to try to grab that $100. But what that also means when you're trying to grab that $100, a lot of times you're also going to be pot committed, because you already have a big portion of your stack in the pot, which means, let's say 25, 50 is the blinds, you have $500 in front of you, and you're trying to pick up the pot by raising to 200. Now somebody's going to re-raise you and put you all in. Well, you have two options. You can either fold or call his raise. But since you already have $200 in the pot, you only have $300 left. pretty much no matter what hand you have, you're almost forced to call his bet, being pot committed. It gives you a lot more strength trying to steal the blinds if your opponent can actually see, oh, this guy is pot committed. I cannot raise him out of the pot. If you have 10,000 in front of you, you make it 200. He says, well, if I raise this guy, he's never going to call me. That's very important when you decide to raise. You scare people away when they see, well, he's going to go all in. If I can't raise him away from this hand, I'm not going to try and steal it from him. I'm not going to try and re-steal. So that's very important, knowing when you're pot committed, knowing when your opponent's pot committed, because a lot of decision making is going to be based upon that. You're going to make raises knowing that your opponents can't get you out of this pot, and that gives you a lot of power. Power of being all in, being pot committed, will scare your opponents away. They're not going to try and mess with you. They know they're going to have to show the best hand to win this pot, and it's not always easy to show the best hand when you start with a 7-6 of diamonds. So you know they're going to have a premium hand. They're going to have a premium hand to try and beat you. So it just gives you a lot of power. Sometimes being pot committed, knowing your opponents are pot committed, make your decisions upon that. A lot of your hands can be decided on the flop. Remember, this is hold'em. You only have 2 cards in your hand. Your opponent has 2 cards. A lot of the time in no limit hold'em, the pots will turn into heads up after the flop. You'll have a raise pre-flop, maybe 1 caller. Sometimes, admittedly, you will have a multi-way pot. You will have a limper, another limper, and 3, 4 limpers. When you have 4 or more people in the pot, I consider it a multi-way pot. And you have to be very careful there. A lot of times in multi-way pots, you have to show down the best hand, because somebody around the table will catch a piece of the flop. So when you flop absolutely nothing in a multi-way pot, don't try to be a hero, try to bluff the whole table, and just let it go. In the long run, it won't be profitable trying to bluff a whole table. In heads-up pots, it's a whole different story. And as I stated, most of the pots in No Limit Hold'em will be heads up after the flop. When you're heads up, you only have 2 players. I have 2 cards, you have 2 cards, and we're going to see a flop with 3 cards out there. A lot of times, nobody will flop anything. If I have 2 certain cards in my hand, let's for example use an ace-king, and 3 cards comes on the flop, I have exactly 34% of flopping a pair, which means, let's say my opponent has 2 other cards in his hand, a 10 and a 9. He has 34% of hitting a pair. 40% of the time, when you're in a heads-up pot, none of us is actually going to flop a pair. That's large. That's a pretty significant number. 40% of the time, nobody flops anything, which means a lot of time, if you take a stab at the pot, your opponent didn't connect, you might win it right here. And that's what I stated earlier in the bluffing chapter. I like to take a lot of small stabs at the pot. Try and win it right there. If your opponent responds, if you call